Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Lies. Gabriel Callahan stood in the shadows of his own study, watching the rain streak down the tall windows of his Beacon Hill mansion. At 52, he possessed the kind of presence that commanded boardrooms and intimidated rivals. 6 feet 3 inches of disciplined muscle, steel gray eyes that missed nothing, and hands that had built a construction empire from nothing. Those same hands now held a crystal tumbler of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the lamplight like liquid gold. The house felt different tonight. Empty. It had been 3 months since the divorce was finalized, 3 months since Bridget had walked away with half of everything he'd built. But Gabriel Callahan was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a predator who planned his hunts with the patience of a spider. Gabriel's story began in the tenements of South Boston, where his Irish immigrant father, Seamus Callahan, had worked construction until his lungs gave out from decades of dust and cement. Gabriel had watched his father die, poor and forgotten, promising himself he'd never suffer the same fate. By 30, he owned Callahan Construction. By 40, he was worth $50 million. By 50, he controlled half the commercial development in New England. The doorbell's chime echoed through the marble foyer. Gabriel set down his glass and walked to answer it, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood. On the doorstep stood his son, Randolph. Randy to everyone except his father. At 28, Randy had inherited his mother's delicate features and his father's calculating mind, though Gabriel had recently discovered his son lacked his moral compass. "Evening, Dad." Randy stepped inside, shaking rain from his expensive coat. "We need to talk." Gabriel studied his son's face. Randy's green eyes, Bridget's eyes, held secrets. Over the past year, Gabriel had noticed the subtle changes. The expensive watch Randy couldn't afford on his marketing salary, the nervous habits when family gathered, the way he looked at his phone when he thought no one was watching. "Drink," Gabriel offered, leading Randy to the study. "Just coffee." Randy settled into the leather chair across from Gabriel's desk, the same chair where Gabriel had built his empire through countless late-night strategy sessions. Gabriel poured coffee from the silver service, a wedding gift from Bridget's parents 29 years ago. The Caldwell family had never approved of their daughter marrying a rough-edged construction worker's son, despite Gabriel's growing success. They'd tolerated him for the grandchildren and the lifestyle he provided, but he'd always felt their condescension. "What's troubling you, son?" Randy wrapped his fingers around the delicate china cup. "It's about Mom." Gabriel's expression remained neutral, but his pulse quickened. "What about her?" "She's been different since the divorce. Happier." Randy's voice carried an odd note, something between guilt and defiance. "She's seeing someone. I assumed she would be." Gabriel sipped his bourbon. "Your mother was never one to be alone long. It's Chuck Herrera." The name hit Gabriel like a physical blow, though he didn't let it show. Chuck Herrera, his former partner, the man who'd helped him secure the contract that had made them both wealthy. The man Gabriel had trusted with his business secrets, his friendship, and apparently, his wife. "How long?" Gabriel's voice remained level. Randy shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, I don't think." "How long, Randolph?" 2 years. The words tumbled out. "Maybe longer. I've known for about 8 months." Gabriel set down his glass with deliberate care. 2 years. During the final years of their marriage, when Bridget had grown distant and cold, claiming Gabriel worked too much, cared too little. When she'd pushed for the divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional neglect. She'd played the part of the neglected wife perfectly while screwing his business partner behind his back. "You've known for 8 months." Gabriel's tone could have frozen fire. "And you said nothing." Randy's face flushed. "She's my mother. I couldn't. She's my wife. Was my wife." Gabriel stood, his imposing frame casting a long shadow. "And Chuck Herrera was my partner. My friend. Dad, please understand." "I understand perfectly." Gabriel moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You chose them over me. Your loyalty lies with the people who betrayed me rather than the man who gave you everything." Randy stood abruptly. "It's not that simple. You were never around. You buried yourself in work while your mother was spreading her legs for Chuck Herrera. Gabriel turned, his steel eyes boring into his son's. Don't romanticize their betrayal, Randolph. Don't make me the villain in their love story. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Randy spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you going to do? Gabriel smiled, and Randy felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't the warm smile he remembered from childhood. It was the smile Gabriel wore when he was about to destroy a competitor. I'm going to remind them both who Gabriel Callahan really is. Chapter 2. The Architect of Ruin. 3 weeks after Randy's confession, Gabriel stood in the private dining room of the Union Club, Boston's most exclusive establishment. Across the mahogany table sat Martin Gorman, a lean man with predatory eyes who specialized in information that others preferred to keep buried. Gorman had been Gabriel's secret weapon for years, the man who dug up the dirt that gave Gabriel leverage in business deals. What do you have for me, Martin? Gorman slid a thick manila envelope across the table. Everything you wanted on Chuck Herrera and more. The man's not as clean as he pretends to be. Gabriel opened the envelope, scanning the documents inside. Financial records, photographs, witness statements, a roadmap to Chuck's vulnerabilities. His former partner had expensive tastes and expensive habits, including a gambling problem he'd hidden for years. How much does he owe? $700,000 to some very impatient people in Providence. Vincent Santos and his crew don't typically extend payment plans. Gorman sipped his wine. Herrera's been robbing Peter to pay Paul for months. Gabriel studied a photograph of Chuck entering a seedy gambling den in Rhode Island. His former partner looked haggard, desperate. Perfect. And my wife. Ex-wife. Gorman corrected gently. Bridget's playing house in that condo you bought her in Back Bay. She thinks she's trading up, planning to marry Herrera once his divorce is final. Gabriel's laugh was cold. Chuck's divorce. His wife doesn't know about the gambling debts. Or about Bridget. She thinks they're working late at the office. Gorman pulled out another photograph. Chuck's wife, Ana Herrera, a beautiful Latina woman who worked as a pediatric nurse. Anna's a good woman. Doesn't deserve what's coming. Gabriel studied Anna's picture. In another life, he might have felt sympathy. But Gabriel Callahan had burned that part of himself the day he learned about Bridget and Chuck's betrayal. Now, there was only the mission, complete and total destruction of those who had wronged him. I need you to arrange a meeting with Vincent Santos. Gorman raised an eyebrow. That's dangerous territory, Gabriel. Santos isn't someone you want to owe favors to. I won't owe him anything. I'm going to do him a service. Gabriel closed the envelope. Chuck Herrera is about to have a very bad week. 2 days later, Gabriel sat in the back room of a restaurant in Providence's Federal Hill, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the aroma of garlic and olive oil. Vincent Santos was a small man with dead eyes and hands that had never done honest work. He listened without interruption as Gabriel laid out his proposal. So you want to buy Herrera's debt? $700,000, plus whatever interest you feel is appropriate. Gabriel placed a briefcase on the table. Cash. Santos opened the briefcase, his eyes lighting up at the neat stacks of hundreds. What's your play here, Callahan? You don't strike me as the debt collection type. Chuck Herrera destroyed my marriage and stole my business secrets. I want him to understand the consequences of betrayal. Santos smiled, a thin line that never reached his eyes. I like a man who understands revenge. Herrera's yours. But if he can't pay you back, that becomes your problem. Chuck Herrera will never pay me back, Gabriel said quietly. That's the point. That evening, Gabriel returned to his Beacon Hill mansion and poured himself 3 fingers of Macallan 25. The pieces were falling into place. Chuck's gambling debts were now Gabriel's to collect, giving him leverage over his former partner. But financial pressure was only the beginning. Gabriel had bigger plans. He walked to his study safe and withdrew a second envelope. This one containing building permits, inspection reports, and contractor agreements. Chuck's construction company was currently working on 3 major projects, including a luxury hotel in downtown Boston. What Chuck didn't know was that Gabriel had quietly acquired controlling interests in all 3 projects through shell companies. Gabriel picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. Mitch Thompson speaking. Mitch, it's Gabriel. I need you to conduct surprise safety inspections on the Herrera projects tomorrow morning. Mitch was the city's chief building inspector, a man who owed his position to Gabriel's political connections. Any particular concerns I should be looking for? I'm sure a thorough inspector like yourself will find numerous code violations, enough to shut down all 3 sites pending extensive remediation. I understand. Anything else? Make sure the press is notified. Chuck Herrera's reputation for quality work should be reassessed. Gabriel hung up and smiled. By tomorrow evening, Chuck will be facing debt collectors, shut down construction sites, and a reputation in ruins. But that was still just the opening move. The real game was about to begin. Chapter 3. The Trap Takes Shape. Gabriel stood in the marble lobby of the Four Seasons, his charcoal suit impeccable, his manner calm. To any observer, he appeared to be a successful businessman meeting a client for lunch. In reality, he was a predator stalking his prey. Chuck Herrera entered the lobby 20 minutes late, his usually perfect appearance showing signs of strain. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled, and his eyes held the haunted look of a man watching his world collapse. The building inspections had shut down his projects, the debt collectors were calling hourly, and his business was hemorrhaging money. Gabriel. Chuck approached warily, as if sensing a trap. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Of course, old friend. Gabriel's smile was warm, but his eyes remained cold. I heard you've been having some difficulties. Perhaps I can help. They moved to the hotel's elegant restaurant, where Gabriel had reserved a private table overlooking the public garden. Chuck ordered a double scotch before noon, a telling sign of his desperation. I know what you're thinking, Chuck began, his voice shaky. About Bridget and me. I know how it looks. How it looks. Gabriel cut his steak with surgical precision. Chuck, you've been sleeping with my wife for 2 years. There's no ambiguity about how it looks. Chuck's face reddened. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Bridget was lonely. You were always working. So you decided to comfort her. How noble. Gabriel took a sip of wine. Tell me, when did it start? Before or after you convinced me to bid on the Riverside project? The question hung in the air like a blade. Chuck's face went pale as he realized Gabriel knew about the Riverside development, the project where Chuck had used inside information from Gabriel's company to underbid and steal the contract. Gabriel, I can explain. No need. I've had months to piece it together. Gabriel leaned back in his chair. You seduced my wife, stole my business intelligence, and used our friendship to destroy me. Very thorough. Chuck reached for his scotch with trembling hands. What do you want? Right now? I want to make you an offer. Gabriel pulled an envelope from his jacket. I'm prepared to pay off your gambling debts and restart your construction projects. Chuck stared at the envelope as if it might contain a snake. What's the catch? No catch. Consider it severance pay for 20 years of partnership. Gabriel's smile was magnanimous. There is one small condition, which is, you're going to leave Boston. Tonight, you'll disappear from Bridget's life, from my son's life, from my city. In return, I'll clean up your messes and you get to start fresh somewhere else. Chuck's eyes narrowed. And if I refuse? Gabriel's expression didn't change, but something deadly flickered in his eyes. Then Vincent Santos and his friends will collect their debt in ways that don't involve money. Your wife Anna will learn about your gambling and your affair. The building department will discover structural defects in your previous projects that could result in criminal charges. And Bridget will realize that her knight in shining armor is actually a broke, cheating gambler who's about to be arrested. The color drained from Chuck's face. You son of a bitch. I'm the son of a bitch you decided to cross. Gabriel stood, dropping the envelope on the table. You have until midnight to decide. Choose wisely. Gabriel left Chuck sitting alone in the restaurant, staring at the envelope that represented both salvation and exile. But Gabriel's day was far from over. His next stop was Bridget's condo in Back Bay, where his ex-wife was about to receive some unexpected news. Bridget answered the door in a silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the afternoon hour. At 48, she maintained the practiced beauty of a woman who had never worked a day in her life, courtesy of Gabriel's money in her own vanity. Gabriel, what are you doing here? May I come in? We need to discuss our son's future. Bridget stepped aside reluctantly. The condo was decorated in the modern style she preferred, cold, sterile, expensive. Nothing like the warm home they'd once shared. What about Randy? Gabriel settled into an uncomfortable designer chair. He's been accepted to the MBA program at Stanford. Full scholarship. Bridget's face lit up. That's wonderful. I'll call him right away. There's a condition. Gabriel's voice stopped her mid-reach for her phone. He leaves for California next week. Next week? But that's impossible. Chuck and I are getting engaged next month, and Randy's going to. Chuck won't be here next month. Gabriel watched her face carefully. In fact, Chuck won't be here tomorrow. Bridget sank onto the white leather sofa, confusion and fear warring on her features. What are you talking about? Your boyfriend has some debts, Bridget. Very serious debts to very serious people. He's leaving Boston tonight to protect his health. You're lying. Gabriel pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. Chuck entering the gambling den in Rhode Island. $700,000 to the Providence mob. Did he mention that during your romantic evenings? Bridget stared at the phone, her perfect composure cracking. No, that's not possible. Chuck doesn't gamble. Chuck does many things you don't know about, including maintaining a wife and 2 children he conveniently forgot to mention. The truth hit Bridget like a physical blow. She believed Chuck was divorced, that she was his fresh start, his redemption. The realization that she'd been just another lie in a web of deception shattered something inside her. Why are you telling me this? Gabriel stood, straightening his tie. Because I want you to understand something very clearly. You chose to betray our marriage for a man who was betraying you. Your judgment is as poor as your character. Bridget's eyes filled with tears, but Gabriel felt no sympathy. What happens now? Now you learn to live with your choices. Our son is going to Stanford, far away from this mess you've created. You'll stay in Boston and think about what you've lost. Gabriel moved toward the door. Oh, and Bridget, the trust fund your parents set up for you? I've been managing those investments for 20 years. Amazing how poorly money can perform when the wrong person is handling it. Bridget's face went white as the implications sank in. Her family money, her safety net, her independence, all of it had been under Gabriel's control since their marriage. You can't do this. My lawyers. Your lawyers work for me now. As of this morning, I've retained every competent divorce attorney in Boston for various consulting projects. Professional courtesy prevents them from working against a current client. Gabriel paused at the door, looking back at the woman who had shared his bed and his life for nearly 3 decades. She looked small and broken on the expensive sofa, surrounded by the empty luxury he'd provided. Goodbye, Bridget. Enjoy your independence. Chapter 4. The Son's Choice. The call came at 2:17 a.m. Gabriel answered on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting it. Dad? It's Randy. Chuck's gone. Gabriel sat up in his leather chair, where he'd been waiting in his study, a glass of bourbon growing warm in his hand. What do you mean, gone? He left Mom a note. Said he had to disappear, that people were after him. She's hysterical. Randy's voice was shaky, confused. She called me crying, saying you did something to him. I simply presented Chuck with some facts about his situation. What he chose to do with that information was his decision. Gabriel's voice remained calm, controlled. Where are you now? At Mom's place. Dad, she's falling apart. She really loved him. Gabriel felt a flash of anger at his son's misplaced sympathy. She loved the lie he presented. The real Chuck Herrera was a gambling addict with a secret family and debts to organized crime. Your mother chose to believe a fantasy. Maybe, but there are no buts, Randolph. Your mother destroyed our family for a mirage. Gabriel stood, pacing to the window that overlooked his meticulously maintained garden. Speaking of choices, we need to discuss your future. Silence stretched across the phone line. Finally, Randy spoke, his voice careful. What do you mean? Stanford's MBA program. You've been accepted with a full scholarship. Classes start next month. Dad, I never applied to Stanford. Gabriel smiled in the darkness. I applied for you. Your undergraduate transcripts, my recommendation letters, and a substantial donation to their business school made you an attractive candidate. I can't just leave. I have a job here, responsibilities. Your responsibilities are to your future, not to cleaning up your mother's mistakes. Gabriel's tone hardened. You have a choice to make, son. You can stay in Boston, watch your mother's world collapse, and remain tied to her poor decisions. Or you can go to Stanford, get your MBA, and build something meaningful with your life. You're trying to get rid of me. I'm trying to save you. Gabriel moved to his desk, where a manila envelope sat waiting. You've been caught between your mother and me for too long. It's corrupted your judgment. What's that supposed to mean? Gabriel opened the envelope, revealing photographs and bank statements. It means I know about the money, Randolph. The $50,000 you've been funneling to your mother from the trust fund I established for you. Randy's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. How did you? I established that trust fund. I monitor every transaction. Gabriel's voice turned cold. You've been stealing from me to support your mother's lifestyle, all while pretending to be neutral in our divorce. It wasn't stealing. That money was mine. That money was for your education and your future. Instead, you used it to help your mother maintain the illusion that she could betray me without consequences. Gabriel sat back down, his movements deliberate and controlled. You chose her side, Randolph. Now you get to live with that choice. Dad, please. Stanford or nowhere. Those are your options. Gabriel's voice was final. You can go to California, earn your MBA, and prove you're capable of loyalty and good judgment. Or you can stay here and watch your mother's world burn. But if you stay, you're no longer my son. The line went quiet except for Randy's breathing. Gabriel could almost hear his son's mind working, weighing loyalty against opportunity, family against future. What happens to Mom if I leave? Your mother is a grown woman who made her choices. She'll survive or she won't. That's not your responsibility anymore. You're really going to destroy her completely, aren't you? Gabriel considered the question seriously. I'm going to ensure she faces the full consequences of her actions. If that destroys her, it's because she built her life on lies and betrayal. Another long pause. Then Randy's voice, smaller now, almost childlike. I was trying to protect her. I know, but she didn't deserve your protection. I did. Gabriel's voice softened slightly. You're my son, Randolph. You have my intelligence, my determination, my potential for greatness. Don't waste that defending someone who chose another man over your father. If I go to Stanford, what happens to us? If you go to Stanford and prove you can make smart choices, you'll inherit everything I've built. The company, the wealth, the power, all of it. But if you stay here, clinging to your mother's sinking ship, you get nothing. Gabriel heard footsteps through the phone, then Bridget's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. Randy was still at her condo, still caught in her web. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow night. The plane tickets are already purchased. Gabriel's tone became businesslike again. First class to San Francisco, then a car to Stanford. Your apartment is already arranged, your tuition paid. All you have to do is get on the plane. And if I don't, then you're choosing her over me, just like she chose Chuck over our marriage. And I treat all betrayers the same way. Gabriel hung up without waiting for a response. He'd planted the seeds. Now Randy would have to choose whether to grow into the man Gabriel had raised him to be, or remain a boy tied to his mother's apron strings. The next evening, Gabriel received a text message with a single word. Okay. 24 hours later, Randolph Callahan was on a plane to California, carrying nothing but a suitcase and the weight of his father's expectations. Gabriel watched the departure information on his laptop, feeling both satisfaction and a strange emptiness. His son had chosen correctly, but Gabriel wondered if he'd lost him in the process. No matter. Randy would learn the value of loyalty in time. And if he didn't, Gabriel had other plans for his legacy. Chapter 5. The Birthday Trap. 6 months had passed since Chuck's disappearance and Randy's departure to Stanford. Gabriel had settled into a routine of controlled isolation, running his empire from his Beacon Hill mansion while the rest of Boston whispered about his divorce and his ex-wife's spectacular fall from grace. Bridget had become a cautionary tale, the society wife who'd lost everything for a man who turned out to be worthless. But Gabriel wasn't finished. The real masterpiece of his revenge was still to come. The invitation arrived on expensive cardstock, hand-delivered to Gabriel's office by a nervous courier. Elegant script announced a birthday celebration for Bridget Caldwell at the exclusive Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel. The date was 3 weeks away, Bridget's 49th birthday. Gabriel studied the invitation with interest. After 6 months of near poverty, by her standards, Bridget was somehow financing an expensive party. Her family money was gone, her alimony was modest, and she had no other income. So where was the money coming from? Gabriel picked up his phone and called Martin Gorman. "I need you to find out who's paying for Bridget's birthday party." "Already on it," Gorman replied. "The party's being funded by someone called Caldwell Holdings, LLC. Shell company registered in Delaware." Gabriel frowned. The Caldwell name was Bridget's maiden name, but her family had disowned her after the divorce scandal. "Who's behind the Shell company?" "Working on it. But I can tell you this. Someone spent serious money on this party. They've rented the entire ballroom, hired a full orchestra, ordered enough champagne for 200 guests. 200 guests. Gabriel smiled coldly. "Interesting. Give me the guest list." 3 days later, Gorman delivered a detailed breakdown of the party arrangements. The guest list read like a who's who of Boston society: judges, politicians, business leaders, and social climbers. All people Gabriel knew, many of whom owed him favors or feared his power. More interesting was what Gorman had discovered about Caldwell Holdings. The company had been established 6 months ago with significant startup capital from an offshore account. Someone with serious money was backing Bridget's attempt at a social comeback. Gabriel studied the financial records, tracing the money through shell companies and foreign banks. The trail was sophisticated, professional, the work of someone who understood high-level financial manipulation. Finally, after days of investigation, a name emerged: Elvira Blake. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Elvira Blake was a legendary Boston socialite, a woman who'd married and buried 3 wealthy husbands while accumulating enough money and secrets to own half the city. She was known for her charity work, her ruthless social climbing, and her hatred of Gabriel Callahan. The hatred stemmed from a business deal 5 years earlier. Elvira had tried to pressure Gabriel into donating prime waterfront property for one of her charity projects. When Gabriel refused, she'd attempted to have the property condemned through political pressure. Gabriel had responded by exposing her third husband's tax evasion to the IRS, destroying her family's reputation and costing them millions in penalties. Now she was using Bridget as a weapon against him, funding his ex-wife's social resurrection as a way to humiliate Gabriel publicly. The birthday party wasn't about celebrating Bridget. It was about showing Boston society that Gabriel Callahan could be defeated. Gabriel picked up his phone and made several calls. Within hours, he'd confirmed his suspicions. Half the guest list had received subtle pressure to attend, reminded of favors they owed Elvira or threats she held over them. The party was designed to be a spectacular snub of Gabriel, a public declaration that his ex-wife had moved beyond him. Gabriel smiled. Elvira Blake had just made the mistake of her very long life. 2 weeks later, Gabriel stood in the study of his Beacon Hill mansion, adjusting his tuxedo in the antique mirror. Tonight was Bridget's birthday party, and Gabriel had some surprises planned. The first surprise was his attendance. He'd never RSVP'd, but his name was on every exclusive guest list in Boston, and no host would dare turn him away. The second surprise was the gift he'd prepared for his ex-wife. Not a traditional birthday present, but something far more meaningful: the truth. Gabriel's phone buzzed with a text from Randy. "Dad, please don't go tonight. Whatever you're planning, just let it go." Gabriel typed back, "Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Your mother is about to get her final education." He deleted Randy's reply without reading it. His son would understand someday. Men like Gabriel Callahan didn't forgive and forget. They ensured that betrayal carried consequences severe enough to discourage future treachery. Gabriel slipped on his platinum cufflinks and headed for the door. The real party was about to begin. Chapter 6: The Revelation. The Fairmont Copley Plaza's ballroom glittered like a scene from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over hundreds of guests dressed in their finest evening wear, while a full orchestra played classics from the terrace. Bridget held court at the center of it all, radiant in a silver gown that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Gabriel entered through the main doors, his presence immediately noticed by those near enough to recognize him. A ripple of whispers followed in his wake as he moved through the crowd, nodding politely to business associates and former friends. Many seemed surprised to see him. Others looked distinctly uncomfortable. Gabriel Callahan, a voice purred behind him. How unexpected. Gabriel turned to face Elvira Blake, resplendent in emerald green silk and enough diamonds to fund a small country. At 73, she remained formidable, sharp-eyed, elegantly vicious, and utterly without conscience. Elvira, lovely party. Very generous of you to fund Bridget's little celebration. Elvira's smile was razor-thin. I don't know what you mean. Of course not. Caldwell Holdings is quite an inspired name for a shell company. Very subtle. Gabriel accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Though I'm curious about your motivation. Surely you don't care about my ex-wife's happiness. I care about justice. You destroyed that poor woman's life out of spite. Gabriel laughed, drawing more stares from nearby guests. Poor woman? Bridget chose to commit adultery with my business partner. She destroyed her own life through her choices. She made one mistake. She made many mistakes. The adultery was just the most obvious. Gabriel's eyes found Bridget across the room, surrounded by admirers. But tonight isn't about past mistakes. Tonight is about revealing current truths. Elvira's face tightened. What are you talking about? You'll see. Gabriel raised a champagne glass in a mock toast. Happy birthday, Bridget. As if summoned by his words, Bridget appeared at Gabriel's side, her face flushed with champagne and triumph. She looked beautiful, confident, and completely unaware of the trap closing around her. Gabriel, I didn't expect you to come. Her voice carried just a hint of slur. She'd been celebrating enthusiastically. I wouldn't miss your special day. 49 years old and still stunning. Gabriel's smile was warm, almost fond. You look radiant. Happiness suits you. Bridget preened under the compliment, her guard lowered by alcohol and the evening's success. Thank you. That's very kind. I have a gift for you. Bridget's eyes lit up with curiosity. You didn't need to. Oh, but I did. Gabriel reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. Something special for a special woman on her special day. The crowd around them had grown larger, drawn by the spectacle of Boston's most infamous divorced couple interacting civilly. Elvira Blake watched with growing unease, sensing something wrong, but unable to identify the threat. Bridget opened the envelope with delicate fingers, her smile bright with anticipation. Inside were photographs, several black and white images that made her face drain of color. What are these? She whispered. Birthday memories, Gabriel said, loudly enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. Some of my favorite pictures of you from the past 6 months. Bridget stared at the photographs, her hands beginning to shake. The images showed her entering and leaving a small apartment in Cambridge, always accompanied by the same man, a tall, dark-haired figure in his 30s. Gabriel, please. Please what? Please don't share your happiness with your friends. Gabriel's voice carried clearly across the ballroom. Everyone should know about your new relationship. After all, that's what tonight is really celebrating, isn't it? The orchestra continued playing, but conversations around them had stopped. Guests leaned in, straining to hear what was happening. Elvira Blake stepped forward, her face pale. Gabriel, whatever game you're playing. No game. Just a revelation. Gabriel took another photograph from the envelope, this one clearer than the others. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Bridget's new boyfriend, Doug Daly. The name rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Doug Daly was notorious in Boston circles, a handsome con artist who specialized in seducing wealthy older women, draining their resources and disappearing. He'd been arrested twice, but never convicted, always managing to flee before the authorities could build a solid case. No, Bridget breathed, staring at the photograph. Doug isn't. He's a legitimate businessman. He owns restaurants. He owns nothing. Gabriel's voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. Doug Daly is a professional gigolo who targets recently divorced women with money. You're his latest mark, Bridget. The apartment he's been taking you to? It's rented by the week. The restaurants he claims to own? They fired him for stealing from the till. Bridget's legs gave out, and she would have fallen if Gabriel hadn't caught her arm. The photographs scattered to the marble floor, evidence of her latest humiliation spread for all to see. "But he loves me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He said he loved me. He loves your alimony payments and the money Elvira's been giving you for this party." Gabriel helped her to a nearby chair, his movements careful and almost tender. "Haven't you wondered how a man in his 30s could afford expensive restaurants and designer clothes on a waiter's salary?" The cruel mathematics of the situation were becoming clear to everyone present. Bridget had been funding her own deception, paying for Doug's lifestyle while believing herself beloved. "Where is he?" someone in the crowd called out. "Where's Doug tonight?" Gabriel checked his watch. "Probably at Logan Airport. His flight to Miami leaves in about 20 minutes. He cleaned out the party account this afternoon. Roughly $40,000 that was supposed to pay for tonight's catering and music." As if on cue, the orchestra stopped playing. The bandleader approached with an embarrassed expression, clearly seeking payment that would never come. Bridget looked around the ballroom with growing horror, finally understanding the full scope of her humiliation. The party she'd thought was her triumphant return to society was actually being held hostage. The guests who'd come to celebrate her birthday were witnessing her complete destruction. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gabriel announced to the silent ballroom, "I'm afraid the party is over. The funding has been discontinued." Elvira Blake pushed through the crowd, her face twisted with rage. "You orchestrated this. You set her up." "I did nothing but reveal the truth." Gabriel's voice was calm, reasonable. Doug Daly found Bridget on his own. Their relationship was real, within the parameters of what Doug calls real. "I simply documented it." "You're destroying her." "No," Gabriel said quietly, looking down at Bridget's broken form. "She destroyed herself. I'm just making sure everyone understands the consequences of betraying Gabriel Callahan." The ballroom began to empty as guests fled the increasingly uncomfortable scene. Within minutes, only Gabriel, Bridget, Elvira, and a few staff members remained in the echoing space. Bridget looked up at her ex-husband, tears streaming down her face. "Why? Haven't you punished me enough?" Gabriel knelt beside her chair, his voice gentle for the first time in months. "This isn't punishment, Bridget. This is education. You needed to learn that choices have consequences, that betrayal carries a price. Tonight was your final lesson." He stood and straightened his tuxedo, preparing to leave. But before he could take a step, the ballroom doors burst open and a figure stumbled in. Randy, still wearing his Stanford sweatshirt, his face flushed from running. "Dad, stop. This has to stop." Gabriel turned, surprised by his son's sudden appearance. "Randolph? What are you doing here?" "I flew back when I heard about the party. I knew you were planning something." Randy moved to his mother's side, kneeling where Gabriel had been moments before. "Mom, are you okay?" Bridget reached for her son with shaking hands. "Randy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." Gabriel watched the reunion with mixed emotions. His son had chosen to return, to stand with his mother in her moment of greatest humiliation. It was either an act of admirable loyalty or terminal stupidity. "You need to leave her alone now," Randy said, standing to face his father. "You've made your point. You've won. Isn't that enough?" Gabriel studied his son's face, seeing determination and moral conviction that reminded him of his younger self. "You're choosing her again. I'm choosing what's right. What you're doing isn't justice, it's cruelty." The words hung in the air between them like a sword. Gabriel felt a moment of something he'd thought burned out of him, doubt. Then his eyes found Elvira Blake, standing smugly behind Randy, and his resolve hardened. "You're still naive, son. Your mother made her choices. Now she lives with them." Gabriel walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the empty ballroom. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at the tableau. His broken ex-wife, his defiant son, and his scheming enemy all clustered together in the ruins of their grand plan. Goodbye, Bridget. Enjoy the rest of your birthday. The doors closed behind him with finality, leaving the others in silence, broken only by Bridget's quiet sobs. Chapter 7. The Sun's Defiance. Gabriel sat in his study at 3 a.m., staring at the dancing flames in his fireplace. The events at the Fairmont played through his mind like a movie he couldn't turn off. He'd achieved everything he'd planned. Bridget was publicly humiliated, Elvira Blake's scheme had backfired spectacularly, and Boston society understood that crossing Gabriel Callahan carried consequences. So why did he feel so empty? The doorbell's chime echoed through the mansion. Gabriel glanced at the security monitor and saw Randy standing on his doorstep, still wearing the Stanford sweatshirt, his face set with determination. Gabriel considered ignoring the bell, but curiosity won out. He opened the door to find his son holding a suitcase and wearing an expression Gabriel hadn't seen since Randy was 12 years old and had decided to stand up to a neighborhood bully. "We need to talk." Gabriel stepped aside, allowing Randy to enter. They moved to the study in silence, the weight of the evening's events hanging between them like a physical presence. "How's your mother?" Sedated. Elvira took her to her house in Brookline. Randy set down his suitcase and faced his father. "She'll survive, but something broke in her tonight. Something that might not heal." Gabriel poured himself a bourbon, not offering one to his son. Bridget has always been fragile when reality intrudes on her fantasies. She's fragile because you spent 6 months systematically destroying everything she cared about. Randy's voice cracked with emotion. "Dad, what you did tonight, it wasn't justice. It was torture. It was education. Your mother needed to understand." "Understand what? That you're more powerful than she is? That betraying you carries consequences? She learned that months ago." Randy began pacing, his movements agitated. "Tonight was about your ego, not about justice." Gabriel studied his son's face, seeing passion and conviction that reminded him uncomfortably of his younger self. "You flew back from Stanford to lecture me about morality?" "I flew back because I realized something. You're becoming the kind of man you always taught me to despise." Randy stopped pacing, his green eyes blazing. "You used to tell me that true strength was protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. What happened to that man?" "That man learned not to trust people who claimed to love him. So you decided to become someone no one could love." The question hit Gabriel like a physical blow. He set down his bourbon with careful precision, fighting the urge to strike back at his son with words designed to wound. "I became someone who couldn't be betrayed again. You became someone who betrays first." Randy pulled a chair closer to Gabriel's desk and sat down, leaning forward earnestly. "Dad, I know what Mom did was wrong. I know Chuck hurt you, and I know I should have told you about their affair sooner. But what you've done in response, it's not who you are. It's exactly who I am. It's who I've always been. You just never saw it before." Randy shook his head. "The man I grew up with built schools and hospitals. He gave anonymous donations to children's charities. He taught me that a man's character is measured by how he treats people who can't fight back." Gabriel's mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "Your childhood memories are selective. I destroyed dozens of competitors to build my empire. I ruined people who stood in my way. The charities and good works were just window dressing." "No." Randy's voice was firm. "The good works were real. The generosity was real. The man who read me bedtime stories and taught me to play chess and spent weekends building tree houses, that man was real too." Gabriel felt something twist in his chest, an emotion he'd thought buried under months of rage and planning. That man was weak. He trusted people who didn't deserve trust. That man was my father. This, Randy gestured at the study, at the evidence of Gabriel's elaborate revenge scattered across the desk. "This is what you've become, but it's not who you have to stay." Gabriel stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, the first hints of dawn were touching the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold. "Your mother destroyed our family. She chose another man over the life we built together. Did you expect me to simply accept that? I expected you to be better than her." Randy's voice was quiet now, sad. "I expected you to show me how a real man handles betrayal. With dignity, with strength, but not with cruelty. Gabriel turned from the window, studying his son's face. And what would you have done if you were married 29 years and discovered your wife was sleeping with your business partner? If you learned your own son had been helping fund their deception? Randy flinched at the reminder of his financial betrayal. I don't know, but I hope I'd have been strong enough not to become a monster. Monster? Gabriel tasted the word, finding it bitter. Is that what you think I am? I think you're a man who's lost his way. I think grief and anger have made you forget who you used to be. Randy leaned forward, his voice urgent. But it's not too late. You can still choose to be better. Gabriel moved back to his desk, picking up one of the photographs from Bridget's birthday party. In it, she was laughing at something Doug Daly had whispered in her ear, her face radiant with happiness that turned out to be built on lies. She looked so happy, Gabriel said quietly. Even after everything that happened between us, part of me was glad she'd found someone who made her smile. What changed your mind? I realized he was using her the same way Chuck used her. She has a talent for choosing men who see her as a means to an end. Gabriel set down the photograph. At least Chuck loved her in his way. Doug just saw her as a paycheck. Randy was quiet for a long moment. Then, so you saved her from him. I exposed him for what he was. In front of 200 people, in the most humiliating way possible. Gabriel's jaw tightened. She needed to learn. She needed protection, not humiliation. She needed someone who cared about her to help her see the truth gently, privately. Randy's voice grew stronger. She needed the man who loved her for 29 years to remember that love doesn't disappear just because someone betrays it. Gabriel stared at his son, seeing a maturity and wisdom that surprised him. You think I still love her? I think you love the woman she used to be. The woman she could be again if someone helped her instead of destroying her. Randy stood, moving toward his suitcase. But that's not why I'm here. Why are you here? Randy unzipped the suitcase and pulled out a manila envelope. Because Elvira Blake isn't finished with you. She hired Doug Daly to seduce Mom. Gabriel's head snapped up. What? Doug Daly wasn't working alone. Elvira hired him 6 months ago to find Mom, romance her, and drain whatever resources she had left. Randy pulled documents from the envelope. She wanted to make sure Mom stayed broken, stayed desperate, so she could use her as a weapon against you. Gabriel took the documents, scanning bank records and wire transfers that painted a clear picture. Elvira Blake had funded Doug Daly's entire operation, from his expensive clothes to his rented apartment to his false restaurant claims. She wanted Mom to be publicly humiliated tonight, Randy continued. She wanted you to be seen as the man who destroyed his ex-wife so completely that she fell for an obvious con artist. It was supposed to turn Boston society against you permanently. Gabriel felt rage building in his chest, but this time it wasn't directed at Bridget or even at Doug Daly. Elvira Blake had manipulated his ex-wife's loneliness and desperation, using her pain as a weapon in their private war. How did you find this out? Doug called Mom from the airport. He felt guilty about taking her money and wanted to confess before he disappeared. Randy's voice was bitter. He told her everything about Elvira's payments, about the plan to humiliate you through her. Mom recorded the call. Gabriel studied the documents more carefully, his mind already working through the implications. Elvira had overplayed her hand, leaving a trail of evidence that could destroy her. What do you want me to do with this information? Randy met his father's eyes steadily. I want you to decide who you really are. The man who destroys people for revenge, or the man who protects people from those who would use them. Gabriel set down the documents and looked at his son, really looked at him. Randy had inherited Gabriel's intelligence and determination, but he'd also inherited something better, a moral compass that pointed toward justice rather than vengeance. You're asking me to forgive your mother. I'm asking you to remember that she was a victim too. Elvira Blake has been pulling strings since before the divorce, making sure Mom stayed isolated and vulnerable. Randy's voice softened. She used Mom's guilt and loneliness against her, just like you used her mistakes against her. Gabriel was quiet for a long time, staring into the dying fire. Finally, he spoke without looking at his son. What would you have me do? Help her. Protect her from Elvira. Show me that the father I remember, The man who taught me about honor and justice is still in there somewhere. Gabriel stood and moved to his safe, withdrawing another envelope. Your mother isn't the only victim of Elvira Blake's schemes. He handed Randy the envelope, which contained financial records and legal documents. Elvira has been systematically destroying the families of her enemies for decades. The charity work she's famous for? She uses it to launder money and hide assets from her victims. The political connections she's so proud of? She maintains them through blackmail and bribery. Randy scanned the documents, his eyes widening. This is enough to put her in prison for the rest of her life. Yes. The question is whether I use this information to destroy her the way she tried to destroy me, or whether I find a more elegant solution. Father and son looked at each other across the desk, and Gabriel saw his own reflection in Randy's eyes. Not the cold, vengeful man he'd become, but the man he'd once been. The man he could choose to be again. I have an idea, Gabriel said quietly, but I'll need your help. Randy smiled for the first time since entering the study. What do you need me to do? Chapter 8, The Reckoning. Gabriel stood in the marble lobby of Blake Tower, the downtown skyscraper that served as headquarters for Elvira Blake's charitable empire. The building was a monument to her vanity, 40 floors of gleaming steel and glass, with her name prominently displayed in gold letters above the entrance. Gabriel had owned bigger buildings, but none quite so ostentatious. Randy waited in the car outside, monitoring police scanners and news feeds. Gabriel's plan required precise timing and complete surprise. Elvira had to be caught off guard, with no opportunity to activate her network of political protectors or destroy incriminating evidence. The elevator whisked Gabriel to the 40th floor, where Elvira's personal office commanded a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. Her secretary, a nervous young man who clearly recognized Gabriel, stammered something about appointments and schedules before Gabriel simply walked past him into the inner sanctum. Elvira Blake sat behind a desk the size of a small aircraft carrier, reviewing documents that probably contained the financial details of her latest scheme. She looked up at Gabriel's entrance with surprise that quickly hardened into hostility. Gabriel Callahan, you have some nerve coming here after last night's performance. Gabriel settled into one of her expensive leather chairs without invitation. Last night was quite educational. I learned things about you that I should have discovered years ago. Such as, Gabriel pulled out his phone and played a recording. Doug Daly's voice filled the office, confessing his paid seduction of Bridget and detailing Elvira's instructions to keep her isolated and desperate. Elvira's face remained impassive, but Gabriel caught the slight tightening around her eyes. I have no idea what you're talking about. Of course not. Gabriel switched off the recording. You're far too sophisticated to leave obvious evidence lying around. Fortunately, Doug Daly wasn't quite as careful as you hoped. Gabriel produced a manila envelope and spread its contents across Elvira's pristine desk. Bank records, wire transfers, recorded conversations, and photographs painted a comprehensive picture of her manipulation scheme. Impressive, Elvira said after examining the evidence, but hardly criminal. I hired a man to provide companionship to a lonely woman. Whatever he chose to do beyond, that was his decision. True, but this. Gabriel placed another set of documents on a desk. This is considerably more serious. Elvira's composure cracked as she recognized the financial records from her various charitable organizations. Detailed spreadsheets showed money flowing from legitimate donations into offshore accounts, then back into personal investments and political bribes. Where did you get these? Martin Gorman is very thorough. It's amazing what people will reveal when they think they're talking to a federal investigator. Gabriel smiled coldly. Your accountant was particularly helpful once he realized the FBI was interested in his creative bookkeeping. Elvira stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, Boston spread beneath them like a map of their shared battlefield. What do you want? Justice. Which means what, exactly? Gabriel joined her at the window, hands clasped behind his back. You've spent 30 years stealing from charities, bribing politicians, and destroying families for your personal entertainment. The Blake Foundation exists to launder money and provide you with a respectable cover for your criminal activities. You can't prove that. I can prove enough to put you in federal prison for the rest of your very long life. Gabriel's voice was conversational, almost friendly. Tax evasion, wire fraud, racketeering, bribery of public officials, the list goes on. You've been so careful to cover your tracks that you documented everything. Elvira turned from the window, her legendary composure finally cracking. What do you want from me? I want you to disappear. Disappear? Gabriel moved back to the desk, gathering up the evidence. You're going to liquidate your assets, return the stolen charity money, and retire to whatever non-extradition country appeals to you. Tonight. That's impossible. I have responsibilities, commitments. You have 12 hours to transfer $73 million to legitimate charity accounts and book a flight to somewhere the FBI can't reach you. Gabriel's tone became harder. I hand this evidence to the federal prosecutor and watch you spend your golden years in an orange jumpsuit. Elvira sank into her chair, the weight of her situation finally registering. You're giving me an ultimatum. I'm giving you a choice. The same choice you gave my ex-wife when you decided to use her pain for your personal vendetta against me. Bridget chose to have an affair. She chose to betray you. Yes, she did. But you chose to exploit her guilt and loneliness, to manipulate her into a relationship designed to humiliate her. Gabriel's voice carried steel. You turned her into a weapon against me, caring nothing for the damage it did to her. Elvira looked up sharply. You care what happens to her. Gabriel considered the question seriously. I care about justice. What you did to Bridget was evil, not because she didn't deserve consequences for her actions, but because you used her suffering to serve your own purposes. And what you did to her last night was cruel, perhaps more cruel than necessary. Gabriel's admission surprised them both, but it was honest cruelty. You hurt her with lies and manipulation. I hurt her with truth. Elvira studied Gabriel's face, searching for weakness or sentiment she could exploit. What happens to Bridget now? Do you continue your campaign of destruction? That's not your concern anymore. Your concern is transferring those funds and booking a flight before the FBI decides you're worth arresting tonight instead of tomorrow. Gabriel moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Elvira? The accountant who's been so helpful? He's already in federal custody, along with 3 of your political contacts and the manager of your offshore accounts. You might want to hurry. Elvira's face went white as the full scope of Gabriel's operation became clear. While she'd been planning Bridget's humiliation, Gabriel had been systematically dismantling her entire criminal network. You son of a bitch. Gabriel smiled, the expression warm and genuinely pleased. I'm the son of an honest construction worker who taught me that there are consequences for stealing from people who can't fight back. Consider this his legacy. Gabriel left Elvira alone in her office, surrounded by the evidence of her crimes and the ruins of her empire. He had no doubt she'd choose exile over prison. She was too clever and too vain to accept public destruction. In the lobby, Gabriel's phone buzzed with a text from Randy. FBI just arrived at Blake Tower. Timing is perfect. Gabriel smiled as he walked toward the exit. Federal agents were entering the building as he left, moving with the purposeful efficiency of people executing arrest warrants. Elvira would discover that her window for escape had just closed. The choice Gabriel had offered was an illusion. She was going to face justice whether she chose exile or imprisonment. The real choice had been Gabriel's, whether to destroy Elvira quietly or publicly, whether to end this war with a whisper or a bang. He'd chosen the bang because people like Elvira Blake needed to understand that there were still consequences for evil in the world. As Gabriel reached his car, Randy looked up from his laptop with a grin. The news vans should arrive in about 10 minutes. By tonight, every charity in Boston will know what Elvira Blake really was. Gabriel settled into the driver's seat, feeling lighter than he had in months. Phase 1 complete. Ready for Phase 2. More than ready. Mom's going to be surprised. Gabriel started the engine, pulling away from Blake Tower as FBI agents flooded the building. Your mother has had enough surprises for one lifetime. What comes next should be considerably more pleasant. As they drove through downtown Boston, Gabriel reflected on the events of the past year. He'd set out to destroy the people who'd betrayed him, and he'd succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. But somewhere along the way, the mission had changed. Now he was fighting for something more important than revenge. He was fighting for redemption. Chapter 9. The Last Dance. 6 months after Elvira Blake's arrest made national headlines, Gabriel stood in the kitchen of a modest colonial house in Lexington, making coffee and listening to the morning news. The anchor was discussing Blake's sentencing, 15 years in federal prison for charity fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering. Gabriel felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice served. The house belonged to Bridget. Gabriel had purchased it quietly through a shell company, then had Randy arrange for her in a charity raffle she'd never entered. It was smaller than what she'd been accustomed to during their marriage, but it was in a good neighborhood and came with a trust fund that would cover expenses and provide dignity without extravagance. Bridget appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a simple blue dress and the kind of smile Gabriel hadn't seen in years. The past 6 months had been transformative for her. Therapy, community service, and honest work as a literacy volunteer had given her purpose beyond social climbing and self-pity. "You're here early," she said, accepting the coffee cup he offered. "Randy's flight arrives in 2 hours. I wanted to make sure everything was ready for his graduation celebration." Bridget's smile widened. "I still can't believe he's finishing his MBA a semester early. We raised an impressive young man." Gabriel studied his ex-wife's face, noting the changes that had nothing to do with physical appearance. The desperate hunger for status and validation was gone, replaced by something deeper and more genuine. She looked younger, more like the woman he'd fallen in love with 30 years ago. "He gets his work ethic from you," Gabriel said diplomatically, "and his moral compass from you." Bridget moved to the window, looking out at the garden she'd been cultivating. "Gabriel, we need to talk about us." Gabriel set down his coffee cup, recognizing the serious tone. "What about us?" "I've been thinking about the last 2 years, about what I did, what you did, what we became." Bridget turned from the window, meeting his eyes directly. "I want to apologize." "Bridget, please, let me say this." She took a deep breath. "I destroyed our marriage. Not because you worked too much or because we grew apart, but because I was selfish and weak and I made terrible choices. Chuck was a mistake, but staying with him for 2 years, that was a betrayal of everything we built together." Gabriel remained silent, letting her speak. "What you did afterward, the revenge, the humiliation, the systematic destruction of my life, it was cruel and devastating." Bridget's voice remained steady, but it was also necessary. "I needed to understand the consequences of my actions. I needed to lose everything to realize what I'd thrown away. I went too far," Gabriel said quietly, "especially at your birthday party. You didn't deserve that level of public humiliation. Maybe I did. Maybe I needed everyone to see what I'd become so I could finally see it myself." Bridget moved closer, her expression earnest. "But here's what I want you to know. These past 6 months, living in this house you secretly bought from me, receiving kindness from the man I betrayed, it's taught me something important, which is that Gabriel Callahan is still the man I fell in love with. Underneath all that anger and need for revenge, you're still the person who reads to children at the hospital and builds playground for poor neighborhoods." Bridget's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "You could have destroyed me completely. Instead, you saved me from myself." Gabriel felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the knot of rage and hurt he'd carried for 2 years. "I'm not the same man you married, Bridget. What happened between us changed me. It changed both of us. The question is whether we can change for the better." Bridget reached out tentatively, touching his hand. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for another chance at marriage. But I'm asking if we can find our way to friendship. For Randy's sake, and for our own." Gabriel looked down at her hand, covering his, remembering all the years they'd been happy together. The betrayal still hurt, probably always would, but the rage had burned itself out months ago. What remained was something more complex. Affection mixed with wariness. Love tempered by hard-earned wisdom. "Friends," he said finally. "I think I can manage that." Bridget smiled through her tears. Thank you. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted the moment. Through the window, they could see Randy climbing out of a taxi, his graduation cap perched jauntily on his head and his MBA diploma case in hand. Our son is home, Bridget said softly. Gabriel squeezed her hand gently, then released it. Let's go welcome him back. They walked to the front door together, and Gabriel felt a strange sense of completion. He'd set out to destroy the people who'd betrayed him, and along the way, he'd discovered something more valuable than revenge, the possibility of redemption. Not just for Bridget and Randy, but for himself. Randy bounded up the front steps, his face glowing with accomplishment and happiness. Mom, Dad, he pulled them both into an enthusiastic hug. I did it. Graduated summa cum laude, internship offer from Goldman Sachs, and I met someone special I want you both to meet. Someone special? Bridget asked with a mother's curiosity. Her name is Lauren Reed. She's brilliant, beautiful, and she actually likes spending time with me despite my questionable family drama. Randy grinned at his parents. I thought I'd bring her home for Thanksgiving, if that's okay with both of you. Gabriel and Bridget exchanged a look, former spouses who understood each other well enough to communicate without words. They were thinking the same thing. Their son had found happiness despite the chaos they'd put him through. We'd love to meet her, Gabriel said. The guest room will be ready, Bridget added. Randy studied their faces, noting the absence of tension he'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 years. Are you two okay? You seem different. Gabriel considered the question. Was he okay? Was this strange new equilibrium they'd found sustainable? He thought about Elvira Blake in federal prison, about Chuck Herrera living under an assumed name in Florida, about the empire he'd built and the family he'd nearly destroyed in his quest for revenge. We're learning to be okay, Gabriel said finally. It's a work in progress. Randy's smile was brilliant, the expression of a young man who'd watched his family tear itself apart and was now seeing it slowly heal. That's all anyone can ask for. As they walked into the house together, Gabriel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He'd started as a man betrayed, had become a force of destruction and revenge, and had somehow found his way to something resembling peace. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was a life he could live with. The afternoon passed in celebration. Randy sharing stories from Stanford, Bridget showing off her garden and her volunteer work, Gabriel quietly pleased to see his son grown into a man of character and conviction. As evening approached, Randy prepared to leave for his hotel, promising to return the next day for more family time. Dad, Randy said as Gabriel walked him to his car. Thank you. For what? For finding your way back to being the man who raised me. For giving Mom a chance to find her way back too. Randy's voice was serious, adult. I know it wasn't easy. I know you had every right to stay angry and bitter. But you chose something better. Gabriel watched his son drive away, then returned to the house where Bridget was cleaning up the remnants of their celebration. She looked up as he entered, her expression questioning. Randy's right, Gabriel said. I did choose something better. We both did. Bridget nodded, understanding flowing between them without need for explanation. They'd both learned the same hard lesson, that betrayal and revenge could destroy everything you cared about if you let them. But grace and forgiveness could rebuild what seemed irreparably broken. Gabriel Callahan had been many things in his 53 years, a construction worker's son, a business empire builder, a husband betrayed, an enemy feared. But tonight, for the first time in years, he was simply a man at peace with his choices. Outside, Boston glittered in the darkness, the city where he'd won and lost and won again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to decide who Gabriel Callahan would be. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of family restored and justice served, Gabriel Callahan was content to be exactly who he was, a man who'd learned that the greatest victory wasn't destroying your enemies, but discovering that you didn't need to. The last dance was over. The music had stopped, and Gabriel Callahan was finally ready to go home. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.